I want you to picture the deck of a commercial fishing boat.
Yeah.
Right out in the Bering Sea.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It is absolutely freezing. The wind is just howling, throwing this like freezing spray right across the bow.
It's a brutal environment.
Totally. And the diesel engine is just thrumming beneath your feet, vibrating through the steel hull. And there's a working family on this boat.
Right, like a father and son operation.
Exactly. A guy and his son. And they are hundreds of miles from land, navigating some of the most unforgiving water on the planet.
Which they've probably been doing for generations, you know?
Right, but sitting inside the wheelhouse of that boat, maybe taped to the console or sitting in a logbook, is just a single piece of paper.
Just one document.
Yeah, a federal commercial fishing permit.
The document that literally dictates every single move they are about to make.
Right. And here's the terrifying reality about that piece of paper for this current 2026 season.
Yeah.
The numbers printed on it, the quotas, the boundaries that determine if this family, makes their mortgage or goes completely bankrupt. That paper is essentially a lie.
It's based on a ghost ecosystem.
Yes. The science that was supposed to calculate those numbers just didn't happen. And that loss of a clear picture, that's exactly what we are wading into today.
We're finally getting into it.
Yeah, we are welcoming you to the finale of this deep dive series.
It's been a long journey to get here.
It has. Because usually when we talk about measuring risk or diagnosing a problem, you expect precision. Right?
Absolutely. You expect hard data.
Like if you break your arm, you go to the hospital, the x-ray shows a jagged white line on a black background, and the doctor just points and says, there it is. That's the break.
Right. You have a diagnostic tool that gives you a clear, unambiguous picture of reality. It provides absolute clarity. You take a measurement, you see the structure, and you know exactly how to apply the cast. The intervention is based on undeniable, immediate data.
But then you step into the world of federal measurement, massive ecological systems. And suddenly, in 2025, that x-ray machine was just unplugged.
Just completely shut down.
Yeah. Over the past few weeks, we've been exploring the vast, often invisible infrastructure of federal measurement. We've looked at, the weather balloons hunting hurricanes.
The toxicology network sniffing the air.
Right. The supercomputers modeling the climate. But today, for this final reckoning, we are pulling away from the abstract, high-altitude debates of Washington budgets.
We're getting out of the spreadsheets.
Exactly. We are stepping away from the political talking points. We are staying right here on the deck of this boat in Alaska.
Because treating this as, like, a political rallying cry completely misses the point.
It really does.
Our goal here is a reckoning of invisible infrastructure. It's an elegiac but entirely fair assessment of what actually happens out in the physical world when the tools we use to see that world are systematically degraded.
Yeah, the consequences don't care about ideology.
No, they don't. They simply manifest as risk transferred right onto the shoulders of everyday citizens.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the gravity of what is happening in the waters off Alaska right now, you have to understand a concept called dead reckoning.
Oh, dead reckoning.
It's this old nautical term from the days before GPS, before, sophisticated satellite uplinks.
Back when navigation was a lot more analog.
Right. So if you were out on the open ocean in the 18th or 19th century and the sky was overcast for days, you couldn't take a celestial fix on the stars.
Right. You couldn't use a sextant.
Exactly. So how did you know where you were? You used dead reckoning. You take your last known position, the absolute last time you had a solid, verifiable fix on a landmark or a star.
Right.
And from that point on the chart, you calculate your current position based purely on your heading, your speed, and the time that has passed. You draw a line.
You're navigating entirely without any new external data.
Exactly. And navigators have crossed oceans relying on that method.
They have, but, and this is the big but, the fundamental mathematical truth of dead reckoning is that error inherently, unavoidably compounds over time.
Compounds, right.
Yeah, so you might calculate your speed perfectly, but an unseen deep water current pushes you slightly off course. Or the wind shifts your heading by just a fraction of a degree.
And you wouldn't even feel it.
You wouldn't. And without a new external fix to correct your position on the map, those tiny, imperceptible errors multiply with every passing hour.
So you look at your chart and you think you're safely in open water, hundreds of fathoms beneath your keel.
But your actual physical position could be miles away, drifting silently toward a submerged reef.
Which brings us to the central question you should keep in mind throughout this entire deep dive.
And it's a big one.
It is. What happens when an entire $6 billion regional economy is forced to sail on dead reckoning.
Right. Because you hear about government cuts and numbers on a spreadsheet, but today we are looking at the actual human beings at the end of that spreadsheet.
We are looking at a family making high-stakes financial bets on a reality that just no longer exists.
And that focus on that single commercial fishing permit is so vital.
Yeah.
I mean, we've spent this series covering massive, almost unimaginably complex atmospheric and computational systems.
Things you can't even really visualize.
Exactly. But this final dive centers on something you can literally hold in your hand. It centers on the ink printed on that permit and the completely broken chain of scientific observation that put it there.
So let's dig into the reality of that boat. Because commercial fishing in the Gulf of Alaska or the Bering Sea, it is not a casual endeavor.
No, it's not just a couple of guys with fishing poles.
Right. It is a massive, high-stakes industrial enterprise, but the foundation of it is built on the backs of family operations.
Yeah, these are people risking their lives in freezing conditions.
But they're also risking immense capital. We're talking about boats that cost millions of dollars. Specialized gear, insurance, fuel.
It's a massive logistical operation.
It really is. And the personal financial stakes of that operation are dictated entirely by the federal harvest specifications issued every single spring.
Yeah, those specifications are the immutable rules of the ocean. They establish the total allowable catches for, dozens of species.
So they dictate the specific quotas a single boat is allowed to haul in.
Exactly. They set the exact opening and closing dates for the season, and they draw the lines around the areas that are completely closed to fishing to protect vital spawning grounds.
And all of those complex biological calculations are distilled down and printed right there on their permit.
Right. It's the blueprint for their entire financial year.
So this family and thousands of other crews like them, they literally plan their lives around that piece of paper.
They have to.
Yeah, if the permit says they can catch a certain tonnage of pollock or cod, they take that number to the bank.
To structure their loans for boat maintenance, yeah.
Right. They use the opening dates to know exactly when to fly their deckhands up to Dutch Harbor or Kodiak.
They use those harvest specifications to estimate their annual gross income so they can pay the mortgage on their house back in Seattle or Anchorage.
So the permit is the physical manifestation of federal measurement.
Exactly.
That family on the boat doesn't directly experience the abstract staffing cuts in Washington, D.C.
No, they don't read the Internal Office of Management and Budget memos dictating agency headcounts.
What they experience are the cascading consequences of those memos, translated into the restrictions or allowances on that piece of paper.
Right, because the permit is the absolute final link in a very long, very fragile chain of scientific observation, data collection, and peer-reviewed analysis.
And for the current 2026 season they are heading into, the data determining their financial survival is a year stale.
A full year.
The numbers on that permit are based on last year's map. It's like, imagine you are running a modern, highly complex logistics business.
Okay, like a trucking company.
Yeah, you're routing a fleet of long-haul trucks across the Rocky Mountains in the winter. And you rely on real-time weather updates, traffic sensors, and supply chain software.
Right, you need that up-to-the-minute data to keep things moving safely.
Exactly. But overnight, your system is secretly downgraded to a version from a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you are routing your trucks based on last year's blizzard, last year's road closures, last year's bridge conditions.
You don't know about the avalanche that wiped out the highway yesterday because your map says the road is clear.
Yes, you're driving blind into a disaster.
And the danger of that year-old map is that in the marine environment, the roads are literally moving.
The ocean isn't static.
Not at all. The reality under the water changes constantly and sometimes violently.
Right.
Fish populations migrate to entirely new latitudes searching for colder water. They experience sudden, massive die-offs due to subtle temperature shifts.
Predator-prey dynamics can invert in a matter of months.
Exactly. So operating with supreme confidence based on an ecological reality that no longer exists, that is a recipe for catastrophic failure.
So the terrifying thing for that family on the boat is that they assume the numbers on their permit came from recent science.
Right. They assume the system worked.
But if you walk into the Anchorage boardroom of the North Pacific Fishery Management Council in December 2025, you realize the people setting those numbers were flying entirely blind.
Because the foundation of those numbers simply wasn't finished.
Exactly. So we have to trace this broken chain backward from the wheelhouse of the boat to the offices and laboratories where the science broke down.
Okay, so the primary governing body making these decisions is the North Pacific Fishery Management Council.
Right.
This is a unique federal state body responsible for setting those harvest specifications for the Bering Sea, the Aleutian Islands, and the Gulf of Alaska.
And we are talking about a jurisdiction overseeing some of the most lucrative, high-volume, and historically well-managed fisheries on planet Earth.
It's a massive responsibility.
It really is.
But the council members, the industry reps, the state officials, the federal regulators, they don't just guess at the quotas. They don't pull numbers out of thin air.
Right. They rely absolutely on a critical, comprehensive scientific document. It's called the SAFE report.
SAFE, S-A-F-E. That stands for Stock Assessment and Fishery Evaluation.
And I want to spend some real time on what a stock assessment actually is, because the phrase sounds so incredibly dry.
It really does. It sounds like a guy with a clipboard counting cans of soup in the back of a grocery store.
Totally. But the reality of it is an unimaginably complex underwater census. I mean, you can't just drain the Bering Sea and count the fish. So how do they actually do this?
Well, the sheer physical mechanics of a stock assessment are staggering. It requires a massive mobilization of resources.
Okay.
Every single summer, NOAA sends specialized research vessels out into the open ocean, and these aren't just boats, they are floating laboratories. They navigate using highly precise, predetermined grids that span hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean.
That's a huge area.
It's immense, and at specific waypoints within that grid, they drop massive trawl nets down to the seafloor or into the middle of the water column, depending on the species they are targeting.
And they tow that net for a highly standardized amount of time, right?
Exactly. Say exactly 30 minutes. And then they haul whatever they caught up onto the deck.
And once it's on the deck, that's when the actual physical labor begins. The scientists are out there in the freezing rain sorting this massive thrashing pile of marine life.
Yeah, they sort the catch by species, they weigh the total biomass, they measure the length of individual fish.
They determine the sex, they extract biological samples.
Right, and they have to do this over and over and over again at hundreds of different grid stations across the entire ocean basin.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is, but that physical trawl survey, that just provides the raw data. That is only the very first step.
Right, because catching a few thousand fish in a net
Yeah.
doesn't tell you how many millions of fish are in the ocean.
Yeah.
You have to extrapolate.
Precisely the challenge. So once the physical survey season ends in the late summer, that raw data goes back to the laboratories.
Primarily at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center in Seattle.
Exactly. And there, a specialized team of quantitative biologists and population dynamicists run that data through incredibly complex mathematical models.
Okay, so they aren't just looking at the fish they caught.
No, they are incorporating ocean temperature data, historical catch rates from the commercial fleet, natural mortality estimates, predator consumption rates.
They are essentially building a virtual replica of the ocean inside a computer.
Yes, to figure out the exact health of the population.
Wow. And once that model produces an estimate, it doesn't just go straight to the permit, right?
Oh no, it has to survive peer review. This brings in the groundfish plan teams.
And those are panels of independent scientists, state biologists, and academics, right?
Yeah, right. And they spend weeks tearing the stock assessment apart. They question the modeling assumptions, they look for statistical anomalies, they demand proof.
So it's a brutal process.
It's a gauntlet. And only after it survives that gauntlet does the stock assessment become a finalized SAFE report, which the council then uses to set the quota.
It is an ironclad, incredibly rigorous chain of custody for scientific truth.
It is, under normal circumstances.
Right, because in 2025, that entire chain of custody collapsed.
It did.
And it wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing bleed of institutional capacity. Let's look at the timeline, because it explains how a $6 billion industry gets derailed.
Okay, let's trace it.
In January 2025, a wave of staffing terminations hit NOAA, and it specifically hollowed out the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, the people who build the mathematical models.
And the NOAA Fisheries Alaska Regional Office, which is the management arm that translates the science into regulation.
Right. The raw numbers of the attrition are staggering when you understand how highly specialized these roles are.
You cannot just hire a random data analyst off the street to run a Bering Sea pollock population model. It takes years of training.
Exactly. By June of 2025, the Alaska Fisheries Science Center had lost 51 employees.
51.
Yeah. Based on the agency's own public accounting, That single loss affected between 6% and 30% of their total operations, depending on the specific division.
And at the exact same time, the Alaska Regional Office lost roughly 28 employees. That represented approximately a quarter of its entire workforce.
A quarter. A quarter of the people responsible for managing the regulations of a multi-billion-dollar industry. Just gone. Evaporated.
And the downstream effects of losing 51 scientists at the Science Center hit the physical surveys immediately.
Right, because in the summer and fall of 2025, the reports coming out described the groundfish surveys as cobbled together.
Yeah, to simply physically staff the research vessels, they had to cannibalize other divisions.
So they were pulling scientists out of their specific research programs just to have enough bodies on the deck of the boats to sort the fish.
Exactly. That degraded the quality of the surveys, and it completely paused the critical research programs those scientists were pulled away from.
Wow. So they get through the summer, they get the raw data back to Seattle, but the staffing attrition slows the mathematical modeling down to an absolute crawl.
The remaining scientists are working brutal hours, but they simply cannot process the data fast enough to meet the autumn deadlines.
They are racing against the clock to build the safe reports before the December council meeting.
Right. And then the compounding disaster strikes.
Oh, the shutdown.
Yep. From October 1st to November 12th of 2025, there is a federal government lapse in appropriations, a partial shutdown.
And the timing could not possibly have been worse.
The scientists, who were already critically behind schedule due to being understaffed, were legally barred from logging into their computers.
That couldn't even work.
They were locked out of the models. The groundfish plan teams, those vital peer review panels, couldn't even convene to evaluate the preliminary work that had been finished.
So the shutdown acted as a brick wall. It was the final, fatal blow on top of a year of severe, grinding attrition.
Exactly.
So, cut to December 2025. The North Pacific Fishery Management Council meets in Anchorage. The room is packed with commercial fishermen, processing plant owners, community leaders.
Everyone is waiting to hear what their livelihood will look like for 2027.
Right. And the council members are sitting there with incomplete, safe documents.
Yeah.
And I want to be incredibly clear about this because it is so easy to jump to conclusions about government mismanagement or malicious intent.
We have to be clear here, yeah.
Both left-wing and right-wing sources might try to spin this, but we are not taking sides. The council members did not ignore the science. They didn't throw their hands up and just guess.
No, they didn't. They were trapped by their own legal mandates.
Right.
Under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, which is the federal law governing all of this, the council is legally required to use the quote-unquote best available scientific information to set quotas.
They cannot arbitrarily invent numbers.
Exactly. And the tragedy of December 2025 was that because the 2025 SAFE reports were functionally incomplete, the legal definition of the best available science defaulted to the completed 2024 reports.
The council made the absolute only legal choice they were permitted to make.
But the mechanical reality of that choice meant baking one full year of data lag into every single quota on every single permit for every single boat in the fleet.
They were forced to mandate dead reckoning.
The system degraded to the point where it could only offer a ghost of the ocean.
Wow.
When you pull enough links, when you defund the survey crews, when you terminate the quantitative analysts, when you lock the peer review panels out of the building, the entire architecture of measurement collapses back to the last known data point.
But let me step into the shoes of the listener for a second. Let me deduce the real risk here.
Sure, let's look at the risk.
If I'm thinking about the vastness of the Pacific Ocean and these fish populations that have existed for tens of thousands of years, why does a one-year lag matter so much?
It seems like a drop in the bucket, right?
Right. A year is literally a blink of an eye in ecological time. If they pulled up 1 billion tons of fish in 2024, I'd assume they're generally fine in 2025. Why is a one-year data gap so inherently dangerous?
The mechanical reality behind that danger is that marine ecosystems do not behave in smooth, predictable, linear ways.
Okay.
Particularly right now, in the face of rapidly changing climate conditions and shifting ocean temperatures, populations can experience catastrophic nonlinear shifts.
So they don't just slowly decline.
No. A fish population doesn't politely decline by 2% a year, giving you time to adjust. Sometimes a marine heat wave triggers a sudden metabolic crisis.
Or a subtle temperature shift causes their primary food source to spawn a month early and the entire juvenile population starves.
Exactly. When that happens, a population can fall off a cliff in a matter of months.
It's like, imagine an intensive care unit.
Okay.
You have a critically ill patient hooked up to a heart monitor. The doctor comes in to check the patient's pulse, but the monitor is secretly only displaying data from exactly a year ago.
Oh, that's a chilling thought.
Right. The doctor looks at the screen, sees a strong, steady, rhythmic heartbeat, and writes on the chart, "Patient is perfectly healthy. No intervention needed."
And the doctor believes that right up until the exact moment, the patient flatlines.
Yes. The heart monitor isn't technically lying about what the patient's heart was doing a year ago, but it is completely catastrophically blind to the reality of what is happening inside the patient's chest today.
And if we apply that to fisheries management, when the council is blind to today's reality, the consequences are irreversible.
Because they might authorize a huge harvest.
Exactly. They might look at that 2024 data and authorize a massive harvest quota that was perfectly sustainable for the robust population that existed last year.
But if that population suffered a sudden collapse over the winter, that same harvest quota is now an engine of destruction.
They might inadvertently authorize the commercial fleet to hunt down and extract the last remaining mature breeding stock in the ocean, pushing the entire species from a temporary decline into total biological annihilation.
Which is terrifying. So the obvious question is, how do we actually catch those collapses before they happen?
Right. How do we see it coming?
If the troll surveys just count the total mass of fish in the net, how do we know if the population is on the verge of a cliff?
To understand that, we have to transition away from the macro census, the massive boats and the huge nets.
And we have to look at the microscopic census. We have to look at the data that vanished from the laboratories. We have to talk about otoliths.
Otoliths. This is genuinely one of the most remarkable, elegant, and underappreciated pieces of biological science on the planet.
So for a listener who might not be familiar with marine biology, what exactly is an otolith?
It's a small, solid calcium carbonate structure located directly inside the inner ear of a fish.
Wait, fish have ears?
Well, inner ears, yeah. They use them for balance and hearing in the water. Every teleost fish has them: pollock, cod, halibut, salmon.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the magic of the otolith is how it grows. As the fish lives, the otolith accretes layers of calcium carbonate. During the summer, when the water is warm and food is plentiful, the otolith grows rapidly, laying down a wide, opaque band. During the winter, when metabolism slows down, it lays down a narrow, translucent band.
Oh. It is literally exactly like the rings of a tree, but happening inside the skull of a fish.
Functionally identical. And this creates a field of study called age and growth analysis.
So when the survey vessels bring their catch-up on deck, they don't just weigh the fish.
No, they physically dissect a representative sample, slicing into the skull to carefully extract these tiny otoliths. They put them in tiny vials and ship them back to the laboratories.
Specifically the Auk Bay Laboratories in Juneau, Alaska, which operates as a vital field station for the Science Center.
Exactly.
And what happens in that lab? I'm picturing a room full of microscopes and thousands of tiny bones.
That is exactly what it is. Highly trained technicians take these tiny otoliths, sometimes embedding them in resin, and they use a specialized diamond saw to slice a cross-section thinner than a piece of paper.
That is so delicate.
Extremely delicate. They bake that slice, place it under a high-powered microscope, and meticulously manually count the alternating bands of growth.
Wow.
By reading the bone, they can determine the absolute exact age of that specific fish. And when you do that thousands of times across an entire survey sample, you generate an incredibly precise age structure for the entire ocean population.
Okay, let me pause and deduce the logic here. Let's say a trawl survey pulls up 10 tons of pollock.
Okay.
If I'm just looking at the sheer weight, the biomass, 10 tons sounds fantastic. The population is huge. Why do I care how old they are? Why isn't tonnage enough?
That's the trap of looking just at biomass. And it's a misconception that has destroyed fisheries in the past. Tonnage hides the demographic truth of the ocean.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine that 10-ton haul is composed entirely of fish that are 10 years old. They are huge, heavy, mature fish. The biomass looks incredible.
Okay.
But if you look at the age structure and you realize there are 0 2-year-old fish, 0 3-year-old fish, and 0 4-year-old fish in the ocean, what does that tell you?
It tells me that the population is basically a walking ghost.
Exactly.
The big fish are going to die of old age or get caught by the fleet, and there's absolutely no younger generation to replace them.
The population is already functionally extinct. We just haven't felt it yet because the old fish are still swimming around.
Oh, man. That's bleak.
Right. Age structure tells managers the demographics. It identifies the cohorts. If the scientists see a massive number of 3-year-old fish, They know a huge wave of healthy adults is about to enter the fishery.
And if they see a blank space in the age data, they know a crash is coming.
Yes. Reading the otoliths is the difference between guessing the health of the next generation and actually knowing it. It allows managers to see the crash coming 3 or 4 years before those fish are even big enough to be caught in the commercial nets.
It is the ultimate early warning system.
It is.
But here is the devastating part of the 2025 budget cuts. The Aging Growth Program at the Auk Bay Lab saw its analytical capacity drop by approximately 40% due to the staffing reductions.
40%. That's massive.
They lost the specific human beings whose entire highly trained career was looking through those microscopes and reading those rings. Nearly half of their ability to process those tiny vital bones was simply wiped out.
Which means the laboratory is forced into a massive backlog. The otoliths are sitting in vials, unread.
The data exists, but the capacity to extract the knowing from the bone is gone.
It is a structural collapse of a critical capability.
It's like trying to plan the multi-million-dollar budget for elementary schools in a major city over the next decade.
Okay, good analogy.
But the city council just fired the entire department responsible for counting the toddlers and the birth rates.
Right.
You won't feel the mistake today. You look around, the third-grade classrooms are full today. The system feels fine.
But in 5 years...
Exactly. In 5 years, when that completely uncounted invisible generation reaches kindergarten, the system collapses because you didn't build enough classrooms.
Because you didn't have the data.
When you lose the people who read the otoliths, you lose your ability to predict the future. You are driving down the highway at 80 miles an hour with the headlights turned off.
And when the headlights turn off in fisheries management, you are forced to fall back on estimating.
The mathematical models have to estimate the age structure instead of knowing it.
Right, and you inherently widen the band of statistical uncertainty. And in the management of natural resources, when uncertainty widens, the risk of a catastrophic mistake increases exponentially.
And while the Auk Bay Lab lost 40% of its capacity, another piece of Alaska's scientific infrastructure, a truly historic piece, didn't just shrink. It completely flatlined.
Yeah, this part is really hard to talk about.
It was padlocked.
Yeah.
And it flatlined after 90 years of unbroken, continuous operation. We have to talk about the profound tragedy of Little Port Walter.
Little Port Walter is, or sadly was, a marine research station located on the southern tip of Baranof Island. It's a remote, rugged location about 85 miles south of Juneau.
And it was established in 1934.
1934. To put the sheer weight of that timeline into perspective, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president.
That's wild.
It was the era of New Deal science. It was the oldest year-round biological field station in the entire state of Alaska.
For over 9 decades, the scientists stationed there maintained continuous, daily observation of a single ecosystem, specifically Sashin Creek and the surrounding estuarine environment.
Over 90 years. Think about what happened in the world while that station was running.
The Great Depression, the entirety of World War II, the Cold War, the dawn of the internet.
Through all of that immense human history, scientists at Little Port Walter were out there in the rain every single day.
They were counting the salmon swimming up the creek. They were measuring the water temperature. They were tracking the predator dynamics.
They were building a towering library of ecological memory.
And that library was not just for the sake of academic curiosity. Its role was absolutely critical, particularly over the last 20 years, for understanding the steep, highly concerning declines in Chinook salmon runs across the Pacific Northwest.
It was vital for that.
Furthermore, the data generated by counting those fish at Little Port Walter was central to fulfilling international diplomatic obligations. We were talking about the U.S.-Canada-Pacific Salmon Treaty.
Right, which is a massive international agreement.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that, because on the surface, it sounds crazy. How does counting fish in one tiny specific creek on one island in Alaska dictate a massive international treaty between two sovereign nations? What is the mechanical link there?
The mechanical link relies on the concept of an index stream. The Pacific Ocean is too vast, and the salmon migrations are too complex to literally count every single fish returning to every single river in North America.
It's physically impossible.
Exactly. So fisheries scientists use index streams like Sashin Creek. Because Little Port Walter was pristine, heavily monitored, and utterly undisturbed by industrial development, the salmon runs there served as a highly accurate proxy and index for the broader health of the ocean ecosystem. By feeding that perfect 90-year data set into complex population models, scientists could accurately estimate the abundance of salmon across the entire region.
So it's the baseline. It's the gold standard that makes all the other math work.
Precisely. The U.S.-Canada Pacific Salmon Treaty allocates the legal harvests of these shared migrating salmon stocks between the fishermen of the two countries.
And the entire negotiation is based on precise abundance estimates.
Right. Much of the hard scientific truth undergirding the United States' position in those high-stakes, highly contentious international negotiations ran straight through the continuous data collected at Little Port Walter.
But in June of 2025, the director of the Alaska Fisheries Science Center had to publicly confirm that the work at Little Port Walter was canceled.
Which is just over.
The staffing losses across the agency were simply too severe to keep the lights on and the researchers provisioned. The oldest research station in Alaska went dark.
And this forces us to confront a fundamental philosophical question about the nature of ecological data.
How so?
Well, a lot of budget analysts in Washington might look at a closure like that and think, okay, it's a pause, we tighten our belts for a few years, and when the budget is restored in 2030, we just send a crew back out there, turn the lights back on, and pick up exactly where we left off.
But they can't do that, can they? You can't pause time.
You absolutely cannot. In the timeline of ecological observation, a gap means that specific scientific certainty is permanently, irrevocably lost.
Right.
You cannot restart a 90-year continuous ecological time series at year one and still call it continuous. The entire mathematical power of a multi-decadal data set is its unbroken continuity.
Because that unbroken chain is what allows scientists to filter out the short-term year-to-year noise and actually see the deep underlying terrifying trends of a changing climate.
Exactly. When you break the chain, the institutional memory of Southeast Alaska's salmon ecosystem is irreversibly damaged. The data from 2026 isn't delayed. It is gone forever.
Let me just challenge the sheer logic of this from a taxpayer's perspective.
Please do.
We have a 90-year streak of vital, internationally significant data. We have an unbroken chain stretching back to the FDR administration that governs international treaties. And we snap it. We intentionally break it to save what exactly?
Yeah.
A fraction of a microscopic fraction of the federal budget. We are padlocking the oldest research station in the state to save the salaries of a handful of field biologists.
That is exactly the logic that drives these kinds of invisible infrastructure cuts. And it leads us directly into the heart of the financial accounting of the situation.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
If you want to understand why a system defaults to dead reckoning, we have to look at the supposed efficiency of saving government salaries and contrast that with the brutal, cascading reality of the Alaskan economy.
We have to examine the concept of invisible savings versus real structural harm.
Exactly. So let's physically weigh the scales here. On one side of the scale, you have the liability, the cost of the science.
All right.
You have the salary of a federal quantitative biologist or a stock assessment scientist. We are generally talking somewhere in the range of $80,000 to $120,000 a year.
It's a solid, middle-class professional salary.
It is. But in the grand scheme of a multi-trillion-dollar federal budget, it is less than a rounding error. It is microscopic.
Right. And on the other side of the scale, you have the asset, the Alaska commercial fishing industry. The science produced by those $100,000 a year, men and women, directly governs and stabilizes an economy that generates approximately $6 billion in value every single year.
$6 billion with a B.
And that isn't just a fabricated multiplier. That includes the direct ex-vessel value, the actual cash price paid to the family on the boat when they unload their catch at the dock.
Yeah, but it also includes the massive downstream economic activity. It's the processing plants employing thousands of workers on shore.
It's the shipping and logistics companies moving that protein across the globe.
It's the coastal community support. The grocery stores, the net menders, the mechanics, the municipal governments that rely on fishery landing taxes to fund their local schools and fire departments.
So if you do the math, the ratio of the science budget to the value of the industry it governs is astonishing. It's somewhere between 1 to 100 and 1 to 1,000, depending on the specific fishery.
You are essentially spending a dime to protect a $100 bill.
Exactly.
To take that a step further, it is not an argument that any individual scientist looking through a microscope is personally generating millions of dollars in value.
Right. It's not a direct one-to-one production.
No, it is an argument that the measurement infrastructure, the labs, the survey vessels, the mathematical models, is incredibly, almost laughably cheap insurance for a multi-billion-dollar economic engine.
But if it's such obvious cheap insurance, why is it constantly on the chopping block? Why do these specific cuts always get framed by politicians as necessary common sense efficiency?
Because of a fatal structural flaw in how human beings and federal ledgers account for risk.
Which is what...
The product of averted catastrophe is invisible.
Say that again. Let that land, because that is the core of this entire series.
The product of averted catastrophe is completely invisible.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Imagine a scientist at Auk Bay correctly analyzes the otoliths, realizes a specific cohort of pollock is severely declining, and feeds that data into the model.
Right.
The council sees the warning, slightly reduces the quota for 2026, and leaves enough breeding stock in the water. The population stabilizes. A multi-million-dollar collapse is cleanly averted.
That's a huge win.
It is, but that averted collapse does not appear as a positive line item on any federal spreadsheet. There is no column for disasters we prevented today.
Wow.
The budget analyst in Washington only sees the $100,000 salary of the scientist as a persistent liability. The ledger is entirely blind to the catastrophic loss that the scientist's daily labor just prevented.
And what amplifies that blindness is the language used to justify the cuts.
The spin, yeah.
Right. When defending these staffing reductions, the administration often frames them as a reorganization or a transformation of the agency, specifically avoiding the word elimination.
And we have to be incredibly rigorous about defining those terms at the operational level on the ground.
Definitely.
Transformation implies redesigning a measurement system to be fundamentally better and more capable. It means deploying new autonomous marine sensors, utilizing advanced artificial intelligence to assist in data processing, creating leaner, more robust observational networks.
It implies an upgrade.
Exactly. Dismantling, on the other hand, is simply removing the human beings who do the work, closing the stations that produce the data, and then slapping the label of efficiency over the resulting gaping hole in our knowledge.
And what we saw in Alaska in 2025 was textbook dismantling.
It was.
The 40% reduction in age and growth analysis isn't an AI upgrade. It's just fewer people reading the otoliths.
Right.
The closure of Little Port Walter isn't a brilliant transition to a new high-tech satellite facility. It's just putting a padlock on the doors of a 90-year-old station.
The distinction matters immensely, because you do not save money by defunding measurement. The physical risk in the ocean doesn't just magically disappear from the universe because the federal government decided to stop paying scientists to monitor it.
No, the risk remains. It just transfers.
It transfers from the federal balance sheet directly onto the shoulders of the public.
It transfers to the permit holder on that boat in the freezing water, who is now forced to navigate their financial future on last year's chart.
It transfers to the seafood processor on shore, who cannot accurately plan their workforce, their freezing capacity, or their supply chain for the season because the quotas they are relying on are based on stale data.
It transfers to the coastal municipality, whose tax base depends on a predictable harvest.
And vitally, it transfers to the indigenous families and communities who rely on subsistence harvests that are deeply intertwined with the health of these same federally managed ecosystems.
And we don't have to guess what happens when that risk materializes. We have agonizing historical proof that the measurement infrastructure is the only thing standing between the industry and total devastation.
Yeah, we have recent examples.
Let's look at the Bering Sea snow crab fishery. In 2022, that fishery utterly collapsed. It was an absolute catastrophe.
It costs the commercial fishing fleets and the surrounding communities hundreds of millions of dollars in direct, unrecoverable losses and triggered a massive, desperate federal disaster declaration.
But it is essential to understand the sequence of events. Federal science did not cause that collapse.
Right, the scientists didn't kill the crab.
The collapse was driven by a severe, unprecedented marine heat wave that fundamentally altered the temperature profile of the Bering Sea and triggered a massive metabolic crisis and die-off of the crab.
But NOAA research vessels tracked that heat wave. NOAA scientists diagnosed the massive die-off through their surveys, and NOAA modelers explained the mechanism of the collapse to the council.
The federal measurement infrastructure detected the catastrophe.
And because they detected it, the managers were able to do the hardest thing possible. They closed the fishery.
Which was agonizing. It bankrupted people.
It did, but the alternative, if they hadn't been measuring, if they had lost their survey capacity and just kept fishing blind based on older data, would have been harvesting the tiny fraction of remaining survivors.
It would have meant the total, unrecoverable biological annihilation of the snow crab in the Bering Sea. They would have fished it to extinction.
And here is the ultimate proof that the measurement system, when it is actually funded and staffed, works to protect the future.
Right.
After 2 consecutive painful cancellations of the season, the Bering Sea snow crab fishery actually reopened for a small, highly targeted harvest in the 2024-2025 season.
The population showed the very first fragile signs of rebound.
The measurement infrastructure doesn't just detect the dying, it detects the recovery. It allows for a tightly managed, carefully calibrated response.
So a reopened season is the most powerful argument for the science that carefully monitored that fragile recovery.
Exactly.
We've also seen the devastating cost of environmental shifts with the Yukon River Chinook salmon closures, which are now grinding into their 5th year.
Yeah, that's a whole other tragedy.
This has effectively ended commercial and subsistence harvests for indigenous communities who have fished the waters of that river for generations. It is a profound cultural severance and a deep economic wound.
It is.
But again, the closure is a desperate decision made on the basis of federal science to prevent the absolute extinction of the run.
Right. Defunding the field biologists who monitor the Yukon won't magically bring the salmon back. It will just ensure we fish them into the abyss without knowing we're doing it until the river is completely empty.
When you dismantle the information capacity of a nation, the supposed efficiency gain is a tiny one-time savings on federal salaries that barely moves the needle of the national debt.
But the true cost is borne over decades by everyday people.
It's borne in quotas set on stale data, in marine stocks pushed quietly past their breaking point before the next assessment catches it, in international treaty obligations we can no longer mathematically defend.
This massive transfer of risk, this willful, systematic blinding of our own management systems, this brings us right back to our core metaphor.
It really does.
It is the exact literal definition of navigating blindly. It is sailing on dead reckoning.
And the terror of dead reckoning is the compounding error. As we discussed, estimating your position without a new external reference works for a short while.
The family on the boat might get likey this season.
Yeah, the 2024 data might happen to be close enough to the hidden 2026 reality that they don't crash the stock and they make their loan payments.
But mathematical error inherently compounds. The longer you sail without a new fix, the wider your band of uncertainty becomes.
And eventually, the uncertainty becomes larger than the ocean you were trying to navigate.
Exactly. And if we pull back the lens for a moment, if we tie the threads of this entire deep dive series together, we see that this compounding error isn't just happening on a boat in Alaska.
Right. This creeping blindness is the defining feature of all the systems we've explored over the last month.
The underlying architecture of the risk is identical across these seemingly disparate fields of
It's
science.
the fisherman in the Bering Sea planning his financial future on last year's chart. But it's also the coastal emergency manager in Florida trying to forecast the exact landfall of a Category 4 hurricane with fewer weather balloons feeding critical atmospheric data into the predictive models.
It's the public health official in a major industrial corridor trying to regulate chemical air pollution with a reduced, hollowed-out staff of toxicologists, effectively blinding the community to the true levels of toxic exposure they are breathing in.
It's the climate scientist trying to model the next 50 years of the planet's agricultural future on a supercomputer that has been fragmented, underfunded, and denied the necessary upgrades to run the most advanced simulations.
These are not just convenient metaphors for each other, they're the exact same structural phenomenon happening simultaneously.
We are looking at public institutions that were explicitly built to forecast danger.
They function as a massive, distributed early warning system for the society that funds them. The NOAA weather models, the EPA toxicology reports, the Alaska fisheries safe reports. They do not have the power to stop the storm.
They do not magically lower the temperature of the Bering Sea to bring back the snow crab.
But they give society the crucial, irreplaceably valuable notice needed to make informed decisions.
And the fundamental economic logic holds true across all of them. The free market cannot charge a fee for a storm warning that prevents a cargo ship from sinking.
You cannot invoice a family for the asthma their child didn't develop because the EPA caught a chemical exceedance before it blanketed a neighborhood.
Because the market cannot monetize the absence of a harm, the public must collectively fund the gathering of that knowledge.
And when that collective funding stops, when the relentless daily gathering of knowledge ceases, the band of uncertainty widens.
And the immense, crushing cost of that uncertainty inevitably lands on everyday people who assume the government is still watching the radar.
I keep thinking about the title of our series, Storm Warning.
We talked about this in an earlier dive, but bears repeating. The very first federal weather forecasters in the United States were stationed at Army Signal Corps offices back in 1870.
1870, right.
Why did the government start doing that? Because commercial ships kept sinking in massive, violent storms on Lake Erie that nobody saw coming.
The private shipping companies couldn't coordinate a comprehensive weather network on their own. It was too vast.
So the public stepped in. We started paying for this invisible infrastructure 150 years ago because we realized, as a developing nation, that the cost of ignorance was simply too high.
The institutional logic hasn't changed a single bit in a century and a half.
Are we really just deciding in 2026 that we're perfectly comfortable letting the ships sink again?
That is the ultimate question of this entire reckoning. It is a question of risk tolerance.
Are we, as a society, comfortable accepting a significantly higher rate of catastrophic failure simply to avoid paying the incredibly modest premium for the early warning system?
It's a huge gamble.
With the heavy weight of that compounding uncertainty hanging over us, we need to return to the place we started. We need to leave the abstract philosophy behind and see how this theoretical risk feels in practice out on the water.
Let's go back to the boat in Alaska.
The family is heading out. They are casting off the heavy lines from the dock. The water in the Gulf looks exactly the same as it did last year.
The freezing spray hitting the deck feels the same. The diesel engine of the boat sounds exactly the same.
Nothing physically a tear is broken.
But the paper permit sitting in the wheelhouse, the single document that dictates their entire financial survival for the year, carries quotas set from last year's data.
It was compiled by a regional management agency that is missing a quarter of its staff.
It relies on a scientific center that is missing 51 of its most vital mathematical modelers.
It relies on a fish aging laboratory that is running at a 40% deficit, leaving massive, dangerous demographic blind spots in the analysis of the ocean's future.
And it is operating in a shifting, warming ecosystem where the oldest continuous research station in the state sat completely dark this year for the very first time since the Great Depression.
The chilling reality is that the ecosystem doesn't care about the federal budget. The fish are exactly where they always are, or they are not.
They are thriving or they are collapsing.
And without the relentless, daily, invisible work of those scientists, the family on the boat won't know the truth until they pull up an empty net.
They won't know the ocean has changed until it is entirely too late to save their livelihood.
That is the ultimate inescapable consequence of dead reckoning. You eventually hit the reef.
You always do.
So, as we close this series, I want to talk directly to you, the listener, because this deep dive ultimately isn't about partisanship.
No, it's not.
It isn't about left versus right, or one administration versus another. Honestly, it isn't even just about NOAA or the EPA or the population of pollock in Alaska. It is much deeper than that.
It's about what we value.
If a society's physical safety, its economic prosperity, and its fundamental ability to feed itself depend entirely on its ability to clearly see what is coming over the horizon. What kind of knowing are we willing to keep paying for?
Yeah.
And what are we willing to navigate without?